So good morning. It is my very honor to welcome today Professor Gaipel and to introduce his lecture. Gaipel was born in Stuttgart in Germany, where he graduated from the Technische Universität in 1987 and thereafter started the LabFAC, the Laboratory for Architecture, before in Stuttgart as a collective and then in Paris. And within this laboratory, which was a network of artists and architects, he has carried out very important works, such as the design of temporary roof for the Arena in Nîmes and the École Nationale Supérieure d'Art in Limoges, which already reveal the key role of some of the topics like openness, adaptability, and context specificity in his research and practice. In 2001, together with Giulia Andi, he founded the architectural practice LIN Architects Urbanists, based in Berlin, and the LIA, the Laboratory for Integrative Architecture, which is the research branch of LIN. Professor Geipel leads the Laboratory for Integrative Architecture at the Technische Universität Berlin, where since 2000 he is full-time professor at the School of Architecture. And the work he carries out within this academic context is particularly relevant and also very evocative in regard to his personal vision and approach to architectural and urban design. First of all, this Laboratory for Integrative Architecture is organized around the integration among teaching, research, and practice. Indeed, the laboratory, basic and applied research are developed with the aim to integrate the knowledge gained from research into applicative projects. In particular, Gaipel teaches and experiments with this integrative approach around flexible, adaptable, and temporary typologies. Indeed, the laboratory's tasks include studies on the adaptability of existing building typologies, research on the historical development of adaptability in architecture, and the development of sustainable strategies in design. The concept of integrative architecture also revolves around another topic, around the cooperation of an interdisciplinary character of the work, both in the academic and in the professional realm. Indeed, the fundamental condition for the implementation of this integrative approach is the interplay between the different disciplines, different knowledges, different perspectives. And this approach is made possible through the cooperation of multidisciplinary teams, which bring together partners and people from various disciplines, from various fields, ranging from architecture to construction engineering, to climate concepts, lighting, philosophy, art, architectural theory, to information design, ecology, and urban economy. So both in the academic and in the professional realm, Gaipel coordinates multidisciplinary and international teams, and this synergic teamwork has a key role in the production of flexible and highly adaptable solutions that enable very rich and very open programs. At the same time, this integrative approach allows for a high flexibility in the working methods, which play a very important role in responding to the complexity of contemporary design tasks, especially concerning the transformation of existing spaces and structure, which is a field within which LIN Architects have carried out very important and outstanding works. Among the many works that the studio has realized, it is essential to mention at least few. First of all, Aviar 14, the transformation of a submarine base in Sanazar that was constructed by the German Navy during the World War II and was a raw and enormous impressive structure located in the harbor of the old town, where LIN Architects transformed this bunker into a contemporary cultural center. The intervention grounds on minimal interferences. This is to say, on the minimalistic but very efficient addition of few equipments and few connections that enable a very fertile dialogue between the old and the new, and enhance the indelible memory of the site by respecting its role, its landmark role in the territory and also in the French culture, as Professor Bucci wrote on Casabella. Another important project is the Cité du Design, a unique institution for research, for education, communication and media in Saint-Étienne, which LIN integrated into the site of the Manufacture d'Art, a former munitions factory, by combining the adaptation of historical buildings and the realization of a new structure, a 200-meter long slender body, the platine, which has an adaptable interclimatic skin, which encloses several programs and fosters connections within the campus and with the city. Both these interventions, among the many, show a very special understanding, a very special interpretation of the architectural work as a practice based on the manipulation of a system of complex interactions between different dimensions, different forces, different layers and bodies, which is a key point in the development of this integrative approach, which I mentioned. When applied to heritage sites, this vision is capable to intelligently and sensitively respond to the many instances, to the many challenges that revolve around the dialogue among different chapters of the life of a site. And these enable a strategic intertwining between the different scales, the different materials, the different technologies that characterize the identity of these sites, and the challenging of traditional disciplinary boundaries and thresholds. So this approach allows the realization of highly sustainable solutions, which combine the respect for the history of the site with the activation of highly complex, highly adaptable and efficient spaces. This integrative and multidisciplinary approach is also applied to urban and landscape projects, where LIN Architects address the urban phenomena by considering all the social, economical, ecological and cultural dimensions that compose them and intertwine all these dimensions in the same progressive framework. And a clear application of this approach in the urban scale can be observed, for example, in the project for the Grand Paris Métropole Douche that developed a vision for the metropolitan region of Paris into a pioneering urban landscape, evolving according to the demands that were set up by the Kyoto Protocol, and envisioning the transformation of this city into a prototype for a prosperous and ecologically balanced model for the 21st century city. So because of the applied distinctive and innovative approach, and because of the outstanding value of its work, the work of LIN Architects have been widely published, widely exhibited and widely awarded also. And today we are very, very grateful to be able to hear more, to know more about this approach through the direct voice of the architect himself, Gaipel. So I'm going to leave the stage to you, Professor Gaipel, and thank you very much again for accepting this invitation.
Thank you very much for this very huge introduction, where I learned some points. And for the invitation, we had a little discussion 10 minutes ago. I would be happy to be in Mantova, but I think we start to learn to exchange and to understand each other also via this kind of media. So thank you once again. You already your talk was quite complete, so some of the arguments perhaps I don't have to develop them again, but I think the theme I was invited is about history and contemporary architecture, and I think this is indeed it's a very important topic, and I would say it's also an important trace through our work, this dialectic between history and contemporary architecture or contemporary issues. On the other hand, it's much too complex to risk here a short resume. Perhaps I will try to explain it a bit through some of our projects. Perhaps only 2 or 3 thoughts in relationship to your theme. I think for us, history it's a constant study of the timeline of the situations in which we work from the past to the current situation, and of course speculating then in the future. On the other hand, I think it's also important work on understanding and perhaps also working on the narrative of situations, of sites, of urban sites, of perhaps very specific sites, and even on buildings. So as you already mentioned in your introduction, we are indeed interested in different scales and we work in different scales. It seems to us really important to have this kind of common view almost in each project between the architectural scale and the urban scale. And I think the same is, of course, for the consideration of the history, the histoire of a specific site, but also of an urban development. What we observe in our work today more and more, that it goes, as you mentioned, one of our very first projects, which where you see here only one slide, the covering of the arena of Nîmes. At the beginning, we were quite often confronted to, I would say, really historical monuments, to history with which is far beyond us. More and more now we are confronted with questions of post-war heritage, and I will show some of the projects in this regard. In the praxis, as you mentioned already, we work at LIN on these 2 scales, and at LIA in the university where I have a chair, which is called Chair for Typological Studies from Architecture to Urbanism. So also here we are really interested in also in the, I would say, in the history of typology Durand, but I could mention now a lot, but I think it's very important to us. So before starting with the projects, I would like to just to touch 2 or 3 themes which are important to us. The first one is a Chinese painting, which is very important for us since a lot of time. I mean, I could show this one, but I could show a couple of other paintings. What is really characteristic in this kind of images is that you have very defined zones, very defined situations on the one side, and on the other side you have more or less white space. And the white space is very important in these images because it gives and it's the intention of this white space to give a kind of openness in some parts of this defined image. And what we I think try in our projects in architecture, but also in the urban projects, not to have a homogeneous, for example, homogeneous flexibility or homogeneous definition, but a kind of graduation of very precise and defined zones, situations, and other which are perhaps much more undefined and much more open for interpretation. Together with this, an image which you know very well, which we like very much, is Saint-Jérôme in his study. And I think what is here interesting are different things. Once again, for us here, the expression of a kind of graduation from inside to outside or from outside to inside. You don't have a clear barrier, you don't have a clear facade, you have a step, and then inside you have a next step in this study. You have also, I think, a graduation of if we could say, with a kind of modern approach, of climatic zones. In the background, you see a landscape, a completely open landscape. You see a hall, which could be a church or a cloister or something. And inside, it starts to be more defined in this study. So once again, the graduation from big to small, from inside to outside. And a concept which I could interpret here also, which is for us which we like very much, is the idea of a monospace, which means it's a first space, a first skin, a first protection. And inside of this skin, you can find more or less defined bigger or smaller situations. Also an image which you know well, Bruegel with his Kinderspiele. What we like here is this kind of coexistence, superposition, exchange between people, but not only people, but also a lot of objects and a lot of different situations. You see once again the nature in the background and much more urban situations on the right of this image. You see buildings, you see games, you see people, you see animals, and there is not a hierarchy between things, but there is a coexistence of a lot of different things, and I think that's probably what we try to find in also in the urban situations, in our urban projects, that we don't believe in a predominance and in the absolute importance of architecture, of the places, but of the places, the architecture, but also the actions which are possible inside. So, as you already heard in the introduction, I don't have to go here inside anymore. It's LIN is our office in where we work on the scales of architecture and urbanism. Elia is this chair for typology, but also our kind of research laboratory. And BWG, it's since some years I'm a member of an excellence cluster of the Humboldt University, which gives a new approach for us because it's much more about cultural history, which became more important now also in our research. So now I will show you some projects you already heard in the introduction about this. One important and difficult project for us, I have to say, was the transformation of the submarine bunker in Sanazar. What you see on this picture here is the Loire River. You see Sanazar, which is a relatively small city on the Atlantic front. There's the city of Nantes, which is a more important city, and in between you have a beautiful landscape of the delta of the Loire. Sanazar was a very important harbor. It was more or less the point for before the Second World War for the South America lines. So if the people wanted to travel to South America, it started from Sanazar. It was a really beautiful harbor. Nantes was more industrial city. You see here the Ile de Nantes, which was harbor, but it was also an important, how to say, shipyard, which doesn't exist today anymore. So in the Second World War, the Germans chose Sanazar for the construction of a submarine bunker, and they implemented it in the middle of the city in the main basin of the harbor. So it was really, you imagine this harbor, this public harbor was the kind of enormous public space, and this public space all of a sudden was filled up with this kind of bunker. What happened then in a second step was that the city of Sanazar was to 85% demolished because of the bunker, because the areas they couldn't destroy the bunker, so they decided to destroy the city in order to make the bunker finally not working anymore, which was a big drama. First the bunker, and then the demolition of the city, which led finally, you see here the bunker after the war, the main buildings, which doesn't exist anymore around the harbor, which led then after the Second World War to a reconstruction of the city, but far away from the harbor. And so Sanazar was, after the World War, finally not, it wasn't oriented to the seaside anymore, because the seaside was bad memory, was destruction, and this changed completely the mentality of the city. So what was interesting for us, that we had, when I was a student with two other students, we get in contact with Paul Virilio, which you can see on this photo here. And in the 80s, Paul Virilio, he proposed us to visit all the most important bunkers around the Atlantic Wall. And he explained us things which were really difficult for us, because it was about the aesthetic also of this kind of buildings. And I have to say, for us it was difficult to think about these buildings in aesthetical dimensions. On the other hand, you know probably these investigations of Paul Virilio in the bunker archaeology, and for Paul Virilio, the bunker were for him a very important example for what he named anthropomorph architecture, because it was an architecture which had to be built around bodies, around the protection of bodies. So for the submarine bunker, it's quite different, because it's not around the body, it's around enormous machines, and this he named infra-architecture. You see here Paul Virilio with the Große Falke, I don't know how to say, it's one of the important bunker. You see here the bassin of Sanazar, and here was the harbor, and now this bunker. You see here the reconstruction, a typical French reconstruction of the 50s of Varesquieu, an important architect, post-war French architect. You see here the submarine bunker and the bridge, which was conceived by Sola Morales in the 1990s. So this the starting point is in many projects in France is the mayor is really important, and the mayor of Sanazar, his theory was that the city which is turned towards the inner country should turn once again to the harbor, and in order to do so, the bunker could be or should be a very important how to say, a very important step. And his theory was that we shouldn't destroy the bunker, but we should emphasize and we should work on this, because if not, nobody would understand why the city is how it is today. So we won the competition for only a small part. I mean, it's already quite big for this part, but the whole bunker is 330 meter long and 90 meter large. So it's more than 3 hectares in the city. And what we won the competition because our approach was quite minimalistic. We named it capillaire, that we open only where it should be connected to outer spaces, that we do minimal interventions, and that we don't try to domesticate the bunker, but that we try to work with this kind of terrific energy. So the program of the whole project is a kind of art center. On one side, a center for what is named emerging arts, and on the other side, Center for Electronic and Emerging Music. So here this is the role for the emerging arts. We kept even the bassin. We try to work with it, but it's very, very hard. On this side and on the other side, we have the center. Sorry, it was not on the good image. Here you see the bassin, the Center of Emerging Arts on this side here, which is open to the harbor with a movable door, and on the other hand, a kind of center for emerging music. we try to do as less as possible, really in order to keep the, I would say, the atmosphere, the quality, even if it's perhaps a terrific quality, but the quality and the strength of the space. On the other side here, one view of the Center for the Emerging Electronic Music, which is in a kind of bunker situation because it has a lot of studios and very important acoustic issues. Connecting all this, we opened up only a door which finally exists already, which is a kind of lateral inner street, where once again we worked more or less with nothing. We have here kind of carpet of LEDs. Here you have part of the musical center. And then one point which seemed to us really important was to connect this inner street with the roof and to open the roof. And I think that was probably the most important point why we won the competition, and on the other hand the most conflictual part, because opening the roof would also mean opening 3 hectares of a concrete desert, and nobody knows what to do on this roof. So we installed here this kind of Piranesian staircase. We made this hole here, you see, this is only a part of this 4-meter concrete in order to step on the roof. And on the roof we installed something which has a long history, which I can't tell here now, but at the moment where we were working on this project, the mayor and the people from Sanazar, they came to Berlin. They visited us, and they visited also the old airport of Tempelhof. And at that moment, the radar dome of the airport of Tempelhof, we learned from friends that they will be dismantled. And finally, we managed to get this kind of dome. To bring it, we had to completely to put it in pieces. We had even to learn the statistics and the calculations of a kind of Buckminster Fuller construction. And we finally could install it on the roof as a kind of starting point, I would say a pioneer, to think about the future development of the whole of the bunker, but also on the possible issues on the roof. So here you have one slide of this part of the emerging Center for Emerging Arts. A second project in France, once again also in a kind of military context, is Saint-Étienne. Saint-Étienne was an important city in the last century until 60s, 70s. There were a lot of steel mills and there were a lot of manufacture. There were weapon manufacture, but there were also kind of catalog manufacture a long time before Amazon or else. You see here a picture of the 1920s. You see here the catalog. they built in their manufacture. And in the 1980s, 90s, there was a big decline of the city because the steel mills, the coal mines, the manufacture all closed down. And the idea already in the 80s, 90s was to build up on the idea of the manufacture, and they created La Biennale du Design, which became quite famous and which then was a kind of starting point for the municipality to think about how to reactivate the manufacture, the site of the manufacture, with this idea of design, a kind of reinterpretation of the history of the city, and to transform finally this huge site, which was a kind of forbidden site because of the military issues. Only the workers could go there, and the idea was to open it, to install a kind of national design institute, which includes exhibition, design school, an architectural school, archives, exhibition spaces, all kind of materiotheks, all kind of things, all turning around the design. So finally, we carefully we renovated with quite low impact the existing buildings, and we proposed finally two new things. One is the Platine, a kind of interclimatic space between inside and outside. You have very protected areas for the library and the materiothek. You have areas like this one for a greenhouse, which has more or less outside climatical conditions. And another object which we proposed as an immediate catalysator at the very starting point of the institution, which is this kind of observatoire, which replaces it, or which reminds a bit the towers, this kind of cooling towers of the manufacture 100 years ago. The Platine, you see here the Platine, which is an important part, but which is only a part of the cité. All the other parts of this institution are located in the historic buildings. You see here some views of the exhibition part, a kind of auditorium in the Platine, the library and the materiothek here, the greenhouse on this side. And then on the other side, this really fantastic spaces, which were in a terrific condition when we arrived, but it needed not very much in order to make with these buildings very beautiful spaces to work on in different scales and in different with different possibilities. So here you see this at the very beginning we convinced the municipality to build this really at the very beginning in order to open up the site and to give the possibility also to the people of Saint-Étienne to discover the manufacture and then to discover peu à peu the construction of the new institution. Here one view, a last view on this project. So here, for example, you see an opening. Sometimes we had to open parts we had also to demolish some parts in order to connect all, but we tried to do it with a very minimal impact in order to give the possibility to this existing buildings really to play their own role with their own quality. In a completely different scale, around the same time, such as the Cité du Design, we had been invited as one of the 10 teams of the Grand Paris. Sarkozy named it Grand Paris Métropole post-Kyoto. And very roughly the intention, I think, at this point of the Sarkozy, of the president, but also of the Ministry of Culture and of a lot of people, was to get rid of this kind of extreme situation where you have Paris, which you see here, in the center, which is finally a very small part of the metropolitan area of Paris with 105 square kilometers, where you have all the richness, all these fantastic situations, and around you have what was named, or what is still named, La Banlieue, with 3,500 square kilometers. And this distinction, or this rupture between the center of Paris and the periphery is really it's very difficult to compare it with other metropolitan areas such as London or Berlin or Tokyo. When you are in Berlin or in Tokyo or in London, in the periphery, you are still from London. In Paris, when you live in Aubervilliers or in Saint-Ouen, or you are banlieusard, you are not Parisien. And this expresses really this kind of dichotomy, which is extreme. So the idea was how to create here kind of more integrated metropolitan situation. And one of our very first images to think about the Seine River, Seine, Paris, which is more or less like this. And around you have, we tried to imagine that you have around other polarities, urban polarities, natural polarities, parks, big forests as they exist, but also more and more we were interested what happens in between. And this in between of possible polarities became more and more important for us. We named it at a certain point Ville Légère. I will come back on this. Here you see urban tissue of Paris. Here on the right side of the banlieue. Here we made a study and we tried to understand the urban typology of the built and of the unbuilt space. And the built and unbuilt space in Paris, it's something between 70 to 30% or 60 to 40%. And in the banlieue, it's the opposite. It's 20 to 80, or it's even less. With one very specific point, that this empty space, unbuilt space, is not an open space, it's not a continuity, but is a kind of patchwork of little entities which are all closed the one to the other spaces, which makes finally this quality, which could be a quality, this open space, not at all relevant for this. Here at our work, more and more, then we started to think about the polarities, urban polarities, industrial polarities, cultural polarities, big forests, and three important themes emerged more and more. On one side, the polarities and la ville légère, that which we think is perhaps less dense, which is less defined, which is probably more provisoire, but which is more flexible and which is a very important value finally for a metropolitan area. Then the important issues of mobility, which are like in France overall very concentrated to the center, and how to create a network which could be much more rhizomatic. And the third part, the integration and to bringing forward the finally really fantastic natural sites, but which are in big parts today hidden, and where it needs not so much in order to bring them back also in the kind of mental map of the Grand Paris. So then we, since some years, we work more and more on this part of on the 9.3, a kind of quite difficult part, I would say, probably the most difficult part of Grand Paris. And in this, what they name 83, it's a kind of the département, and this 83. There are a lot of social conflicts and there's a lot of unemployment. There are really very difficult urban situations. There are the Grand Ensemble, and more they start to call it also ghetto. Luc Bronner, which is a very important journalist of Le Monde, he stayed for some years in this area and he coined it La Loi du Ghetto. And I think what was taboo until then started to be really discussed as a ghetto. On the other hand, you have people like the ambassador of the United States in Paris, which went every 3 months exactly in this area, because he said exactly in the periphery of the cities, but also in the periphery of our societies, we find the interesting new evolutions, the innovations, and we have to look very carefully what happens there and to help them to bring them up. So that led us here to, that's a bit difficult to read, but it's, for us, it's an important image which we made in the office, and we made it more and more. We name it Le Moteur de Développement. It means that in this kind of very difficult urban areas, it's important to work on the mobility, to work on the urban quality, to work on the natural areas. But on the other hand, the narrative is as important as this part. And when we start, for example, to open up closed forests, because for a bit difficult reason, most of the forests in the Grand Paris, they are not accessible or they start to be accessible. When we work here, this changes also the mental map. And when the mental map changes, this brings once again energy in order to change also the physical condition. And so the narrative on one side and the physical situation on the other side, it's a kind of very related machine in order to work on this kind of very huge territories. So here you see a map of our work of the 9-3. Here you don't see it, it's the airport, Roissy, and it goes here until Mandla-Vallée. With the opening of the forests and with little effort, the forest could be also, or can be, will be connected. And I think what is really important in our work, that we didn't concentrate only on some polarities, but that we try also to work on what we named the Wille share. And of course, the Wille share, this entre deux, this in between the polarities, it's impossible to work on this large scale. So what we propose here are like mini EBAs, like mini architectural urban exhibition zones, where we start to implement specific projects, a kind of pilot projects, and these pilot projects then start to influence the development of the surroundings. Here I can show only some pictures. I mean, this kind of I mean, yeah, it's too difficult now to explain in detail, but what is important for us is not to change radically the cityscape, the skyline, the urban density, but more to try to find what are the missing points, what are the already existing qualities, and how we can start as little pioneers to improve, to intensify that much more, to intensify than to densify the existing situation of this kind of entre deux. Here more work in quite difficult conditions in the Grand Ensemble. And here, of course, this kind of ville pavillonnaire, this single family house, carpets. Also here, how perhaps to connect sometimes, how to bring a kind of mobility, different mobility, that people don't have to use the car always, but also to bring sometimes wherever Fablab, a school, a kindergarten, in order to make also these areas more sustainable. Yeah, this is now this is more a very dense part where we finished the first block here, where the buildings, all the buildings have, which for Simon doesn't exist at all, have open, flexible ground floors for shops, but also for workshops, for spaces to work, so that we don't have only this kind of housing situation, but that always the new housing projects are together with the possibility of new activities. No, that's radically different. It's for us. It's really a kind of, it's the opposite. we won a competition in Paris on the front of the Seine, one of the very last spots which were more or less empty. There was an old La Société des Explosifs, a kind of Dynamite Nobel, French Dynamite Nobel, little factory, which had to leave, and we won the competition for this part here. You have here Notre Dame, l'Université de Jussieu, Le Jardin des Plantes. So I think La Bastille, I think more central and more pressure is very hard. So we had to build a very high density. We had to build very, very high price apartments, respecting very strict urban rules, with one advantage, that in Paris for this kind of projects now the city obliges the developers to build 50% social housing. So that means 50% social housing, which the developer has to sell then for a very low price back to the city, which means that for the rest of the apartments they have to be even more expensive. And so it became really a kind of very difficult exercise. And you see here the building with a large opening to the Seine. And perhaps what you can see here is that these floors are higher, and they became lower and lower and lower and lower. And this has one reason, because we made a building which is very deep in the first floors, and it becomes normal in these floors. So the more it's deep, the more the apartments are high, and the higher they are, and also the more expensive, the lower they are. So that there's a kind of balance between different qualities. And you see here a plan with this front here. Of course, these are the expensive apartments they sell, and these are the social apartments. One thing which was really important for us, and I think we succeeded quite well, was that already for this part here, all the apartments go through, and they have all a lateral view on the Seine. And this inner apartments here, they go also through, and they have two gardens. You will see perhaps here. So here it's this kind of Fibonacci. It becomes more and more, less and less high, and it steps back, so that here we have normal deepness. Here we are 16 meters deep. You see here Notre Dame. You see openings to the inner squares. And another point which seemed to us really important, normally these projects between the developer side and the social housing side, the social housing side has a completely different architecture and facade, and we convinced the developer to have exactly the same quality, the same material. The only thing which you see here which is different is that here you have one floor less, So here you have higher spaces than here, but here at this point they meet again. So here you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and here you have 7, but they have all the same height because they have more or less also the same deepness. This floor plan, which was really a kind of long research, led finally to 71 different floor plans, which were also quite a nice challenge for us. Here you see the inner part. Okay, now I come to Germany. I have to speed up a bit. In Germany, we have several housing projects, and finally a very small housing project, which started to be a very small housing project, was an experimental competition in the city of Bremen. And the city of Bremen had important damages during World War II. So here you see the city, and here you see the reconstruction of the city. What is very specific in Bremen is they had the damages in the city, and they built this kind of big housing project in the city. You have finally these periphery situations, not in the periphery, but sometimes really in the center of the city. And that creates a very interesting and very specific quality, if I can say. This quality leads to a situation that the people which occupied the apartment when it was built in the 60s, you see them here, the demographic distribution, and this is the demographic distribution today, because these people, they like their apartments and they stay in the apartments even if there are really issues which are quite difficult because the apartments are old, because there's no proximity services, because 80% of the apartments are all the same, 3-room apartments with, of course, small bathrooms and not at all adapted for elderly people, no elevators at all. So there are problematic points, but on the other side, the people, they like to live there. And it's this kind of, entre guillemets, Gartenstadt idea, which the people really appreciate, and they would like to stay. So, and in this situation where the city and the shareholders of this Siedlung, they know that the problems will grow now with the people becoming older and older, they started a kind of experimental competition, how to change, how to give a kind of mixity of hybridization in this kind of areas. And what we proposed here with our idea of Bremer Punkt, which means Punto di Bremen, to develop finally a very small unit, 13 meter by 13 meter, with a prefabricated concrete frame, no cellar, I mean no underground construction, and all the rest in wood, in order to be able to build very fast with a minimal impact for the people living there, and the possibility to bridge these buildings with elevator and with different apartments, possibly to the existing, in order to give also to the existing people access to elevators, and perhaps also to generate multi-generational apartment types. So that was our proposal, and I mean, it was a kind of experimental proposal. And finally, the shareholder of the Siedlung, they asked us to make a prototype. Here you would see how it will be when it's bridged. To make a prototype, and here you see the prototype, which is built in 29 days. So, which means for the neighbors, of course, there's a construction site, there's an impact, but on the other side, the impact is really minimal in relationship to a normal construction site, which needs ensuring a minimum 12 months. So here you see the first prototype with this kind of Laubengang situation on the other side, and the possibility to link bridges to the existing. This small unit has inside, as it's quite small, 13 meter by 13 meter, it's free span. So inside it's completely flexible. The different apartments, they are really completely flexible, and you can also mix or superpose more or less every type. Here with the idea, for example, to have elderly people which live here linked via a bridge perhaps to another part of the family, and so to have a kind of interesting multi-generation habitat. It started with a prototype, and now we are on our 12th module. You see it here. They are built now in different situations, always with this idea to integrate situations where it's possible. And here it's quite funny, because here you see on one side this kind of Siedlung, and on the other side this kind of small houses, and the opportunity here of a kind of old infrastructural site between these two areas. Very fast here, finally the same idea in Berlin, but much bigger, important housing company, social housing company made a competition which we could win 2 years ago for a kind of similar idea, but much bigger. In Berlin, you have also, in East Berlin, you have also this kind of huge prefabricated housing complexes with a lot of undefined green space. And this company, the Hovoge, she owns more or less, she owns not all, but she owns large parts of all this part of each Berlin. You see here, perhaps here, you see Tempelhof, the Tiergarten, and so it's the eastern part, but it's still more or less the center of the city. And what they wanted to have was a kind of Plattenbau prefabricated tower 2.0. It means the prefabrication of the 60s, 70s, 80s of the RDR, but with the qualities of complexity, of diversity, of architectural quality. So our proposal was we investigated, it's a very simple diagram here. This is the typical Berliner Mietsblock. Very, very dense, with courtyards, but most of the ground floor are public or workshops or ateliers, they are active. In the RDR, you have these huge housing blocks, and then sometimes you have this kind of huge prefabricated elements for swimming pools, for Markthalle, for a lot of different things. And this is our proposal here, a kind of, once again, like the Bremer Punkt, something prefabricated, but with an active ground floor inside a kind of more or less open distribution with sometimes public elements and also the roof public. Here you see this kind of more public parts, the ground floor open, and then here the normal housing areas. What is perhaps a bit bizarre in our project is that we don't have a double ground floor. It's always 3 meters, 3 meters, 3 meters. So you could also partly say we put apartments in some parts of the ground floor, or we make really much bigger spaces. Normally in Berlin you are obliged to build 4 to 5 meters in the ground floor and then lower. And finally we convinced them that it's 3 meters starting from here. So here in this perspective it's double height, but here for example it's already housing in the kind of first floor. With a kind of quite sophisticated prefabrication structure. Yeah, I can't explain. It's a bit the idea of a very, very simple structure which could then react with different elements to different situations. What I mentioned, this kind of idea of a public inner distribution, a bit. We are quite impressed by the typology of the Greek polykatekia, which plays also between really private housing and publicity, and then this kind of more public parts in the roof. So, and for the moment we make the studies with a hovoge in order to place the first prototype, a collage. And that's the last project we just finished, which where they could win the French Équerre d'Argent, which is an important architectural prize. So you remember I started with Sanazar, now we are here in Nantes. L'Île de Nantes, which was a kind of industrial, the industrial part of the city of Nantes, which is here. All what the city didn't want to have in the city, they put it in the island of Nantes. So there are power stations, there are a lot of things, there are big railway areas, and there were this kind of very famous chantier naval, the shipyards. And what the city of Nantes, together with landscape architect Geipel, they started to make a very careful transformation of the Île de Nantes, where they didn't demolish. They tried to keep some major elements, and there are, for example, here there are really very nice halls, but now it's more and more come to an end, and we could win the competition for a hall here, one of the last existing halls, for a program for the university to make a kind of innovation center for digital arts for the different departments of the University of Nantes. You see here the existing hall. It was related to the shipyard. They built here the propeller for the ships, and finally they wanted to have a program which was much bigger than what could be really filled here finally in this hall. So it was even open in the competition to demolish. What was our approach, that we said we would like to keep more or less all, and what we tried to do were to densify the existing structure by putting 2 new levels of mezzanines, but keeping finally this kind of basilic typology by putting here and here a second mezzanine. So they are quite low. Sometimes they are double high, but finally the hall, in its structure and also with its simplicity and flexibility, we could keep it completely. You see it here. Here it's a new art school, and it's finally quite a small piece, but it was a very intense work and also discussion with the university, because they wanted it much more open and modern, and we tried to work really on this quality of this very simple industrial hall, and by adding or removing only little parts in order to create this kind of institution. So there was one element which was much too big to put it here, and finally we decided to put it in a kind of black box, which is on one end of the hall, with very thin columns. Sorry. And here it's the last one. You see here the propellers. These are the molds for the propellers, which we could keep here. And you see here a bit the atmosphere. We also made the decision to make it more or less monochrome. It means to use only one silver gray for all the elements in order to strengthen the quality of the existing building. So thank you very much for your attention. I am here at the end. Thank you.